begins at 111 miles an hour, and so some of the models are suggesting this may indeed strengthen to a Cat 3. That's considered a major hurricane, and once you get to that level, you get into some serious storm surge issues, which specifically for Tampa Bay is a big problem because they're still recovering from Helene storm surge. Helene passing almost 100 miles to the west of Tampa Bay, but sending in all that water. And I'm sure you've seen the pictures out of Treasure Island and the various communities in Pinellas County, not to mention up and down Cedar Key, Horseshoe Beach. But they're cleaning up now, they're recovering, and to have another system come in, a hurricane of any kind, much less what could be a major hurricane, is going to be a very, very bad thing. And if it does track north, that would produce the worst impacts as far as flooding goes for Tampa, storm surge flooding. If it comes in south of Tampa Bay, it would spare Tampa of the major storm surge. We'd actually see the bay possibly getting emptied out from a northeast flow. If it goes south of Tampa, we're going to catch some really heavy rain in Orlando. It'll be Ian-esque as far as the track goes. If it goes north of Tampa, we catch a lot of wind with the heaviest rain likely staying just north of the Orlando area.
I think we can maybe leave this on here for a second before I click forward, just to give people some perspective. I put the distance of the cone here if you want to speak to that. The cone is still 400 miles wide. So we're talking about Wednesday's the day of impact. There will be rain out ahead of it on Tuesday. That's indirectly tied to it with our front. So there'll be a lot of storms and downpours Monday night, Tuesday. You might think it's coming early. That's expected, but that's not the hurricane. The hurricane is Wednesday, but look how wide the cone still is.
Huge, huge cone.
Obviously, like you said, the scenarios around Tampa, but there's a lot of room for changes with where the center is going to go still.
It's a keen observation, and as they fly some hurricane recon flights into the system over the next couple of days, hopefully the forecast becomes more certain. You'd see the cone becoming a lot narrower. The cone is that of uncertainty. It could make landfall as far north as the Big Bend or as far south as the Keys. If it made landfall in the Keys, we'd see very little. If it made landfall up in the Big Bend, it would be another Perry type of a storm. The center of the cone is Tampa, and that's where most of the models are in general agreement now that that's where we'd see a landfall, which is why we've got to take this seriously now. Again, the cone indicating a huge spread of potentials, but as now 3 days away we get closer to it, we'll have a better beat on this based on the hurricane recon data where they fly the airplanes in to get a better idea of where this is going. But there are still some wild cards, the strength is not written in stone. We've got some really great models now that have the potential to really come through and be looked at the end of the hurricane season as having been very helpful. But sometimes models can overdo it and underdo it. And that's the thing about the tropics, they're very fickle. There's just nothing written in stone. I think a lot of folks I've had a couple of emails from people saying, well, you said this wasn't going to be a big thing. And you're right, last week it didn't look like it was going to be a big thing. This cold front is still coming down, and cold fronts have wind shear. Wind shear tears apart systems. Wind shear elongates circulations, preventing rapid strengthening. But this now is a situation where the cold front maybe doesn't come down quite as fast, and the developing tropical system is a little bit farther south. And having that that helped that it had the Pacific system cross over. It had to spin. It didn't have to wait to get the spin, so it spun up before the front got here, making it a stronger system.
So we drew this together, maybe just try to simplify things for us in Central Florida. So you were talking about with us earlier about how there's a very small change in the track means a big difference from what we see here in the Orlando area. So some of the guidance is still indicating, but just to make this really smooth and easy to see, if you want to walk people through that, it seems pretty clear that if the storm ends up being weaker, it goes further south. And if it's stronger, it's going to go and curl more north because it will feel a taller hurricane. And a hurricane that's stronger is taller. It feels more of the jet stream, so it might get pulled more north. So that'll, I guess, will be something to watch, Brooks, is if it's stronger sooner, it might end up this northern track, and if it stays kind of weaker, it might just go more due east.
So if it takes track A, the impacts here would be hurricane force wind gusts. In Orlando, we'd probably have some pretty widespread power outages for a couple of days. There could be some flooding, especially north of the track. So that would be for like Nature Coast up through Marion County and into Jacksonville. And we'd have a tornado threat, a significant tornado threat if it took path A. But more so, we'd be getting hurricane force winds. This would also be a track, path A, that would send a pretty bad storm surge into Tampa Bay, causing inundation of places that haven't seen water that high in about 100 years, 1921. So that would be your classic major hurricane, Tarpon Springs 1921 setup, which would be very, very bad because back then there's only 5,000 people that lived here. Now we've got 2.5 million people that live in Tampa Bay. If it took a track farther south, which is totally possible, totally possible. And to say Fort Myers, we'd have much lower impacts here, but we could still get some heavy rain, and that could cause flooding concerns around the region, considering our ground is so saturated. And because of that, the National Weather Service has already issued a flood watch from roughly Orlando Point south, saying, you know what, we've got this thing coming in one form or another, and it's going to dump between 6 and 12 inches of rain.